The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training facility as Sarah Martinez adjusted her grip on the rifle. Her hands, smaller than those of her male counterparts, wrapped around the weapon with a familiarity that had taken months to develop. The shooting range stretched out before her like a green ocean, dotted with targets that seemed to mock her with their distance. Sarah had dreamed of this moment since she was 12 years old, watching her grandfather clean his old hunting rifle on the kitchen table. He had served in Vietnam, never speaking much about his time there, but his steady hands and patient demeanor when teaching her to shoot had planted a seed that grew into an unshakable determination. Now, at 24, she stood among 47 other candidates at the most elite sniper training program in the military. The drill instructor's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Sergeant Major Richards had the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. His weathered face had seen decades of service, and his eyes held the weight of countless missions. When he looked at Sarah, she felt as though he could see straight through to her doubts and fears. "Listen up, candidates," Richards barked, his voice carrying across the range. "This is not your average shooting course. This is where we separate the marksmen from the pretenders. Over the next 12 weeks, you will be pushed beyond what you think are your limits. Some of you will wash out. Most of you will wash out. The question is not whether you can shoot. The question is whether you can think, adapt, and execute under pressure that would break ordinary soldiers." Sarah's stomach tightened. She had already faced skepticism from the moment she arrived. Whispered conversations stopped when she walked by. Sideways glances followed her movements. The other candidates, all men, had formed their initial bonds during the first week, but she remained on the outside, a curiosity rather than a colleague. The first shooting exercise began with standard marksmanship tests. Each candidate lay prone on the firing line, rifles positioned and ready. Sarah's breathing slowed as she settled into position. This was familiar territory. The weight of the rifle, the alignment of the scope, the gentle squeeze of the trigger, these elements had become second nature through countless hours of practice. Her first shot rang out with the others, a symphony of controlled violence. The target downrange revealed a tight grouping near the center. Not perfect, but solid. She cycled the bolt and prepared for the next shot, aware that every movement was being observed and evaluated. Instructor Williams, a compact man with quick eyes, walked behind the firing line, occasionally stopping to observe a candidate's technique. When he reached Sarah, he paused longer than with the others. His gaze moved from her stance to her grip, from her breathing pattern to the way she settled behind the scope. "Interesting technique, Martinez," he said, his voice neutral but carrying an undertone she couldn't quite identify. "Where did you learn to shoot?" "My grandfather taught me the basics, sir. The rest I learned through practice and studying." Sarah kept her eyes forward, focused on the target. Williams nodded slowly and moved on, but Sarah caught the slight frown that crossed his features. She had seen that expression before, the look of someone trying to reconcile what they expected to see with what was actually in front of them. The days that followed established a routine of physical training, classroom instruction, and range time. Sarah threw herself into every aspect of the program with fierce determination. The academic portions, covering ballistics, weather patterns, and tactical planning, came naturally to her analytical mind. She had studied engineering in college before enlisting, and the mathematical principles underlying long-range shooting felt like familiar friends. But it was during the practical exercises that the first real challenges emerged. The physical demands of the course were extreme, designed to weed out candidates who couldn't handle the stress of real-world operations. Long marches with full equipment, obstacle courses completed while carrying precision rifles, and endurance tests that pushed every muscle to its limit. Sarah's smaller frame worked against her in these challenges. Where her male counterparts could rely on raw strength, she had to use technique and efficiency. She watched how the most successful candidates moved, learning to distribute weight more effectively and find leverage where others used brute force. Slowly, her times improved, but she remained in the bottom third of the class in physical performance. The whispered conversations grew louder during the third week. She overheard fragments of discussions about whether women belonged in elite units, whether the standards had been lowered to accommodate her presence, whether she was taking a spot that should have gone to a real soldier. Each comment was like a small cut, not deep enough to stop her but painful enough to remind her that she was fighting an uphill battle. Candidate Thompson, a tall man from Texas with an easy smile and quick wit, was the first to directly address the elephant in the room. During a break between exercises, he approached Sarah while she was cleaning her rifle. "You know they're talking about you, right?" he said without preamble. Sarah looked up from the rifle components spread before her on a towel. "I figured as much. People always talk. Some of them think you're here because of politics. Diversity quotas and all that." Thompson's tone was matter-of-fact, not accusatory. "And, what do you think?" Sarah continued working on her rifle, her hands steady despite the tension in her chest. Thompson was quiet for a moment, watching her methodical approach to the cleaning process. "I think you shoot better than half the guys here, and you work twice as hard as most of them. But that might not matter if the instructors have already made up their minds." The conversation stayed with Sarah through the following days. She began to notice the subtle signs that Thompson had hinted at, the way certain instructors spent less time offering her feedback, the way her range scores seemed to require more verification than others, the way equipment issues always seemed to find her at the most inconvenient times. The fourth week brought the introduction of advanced shooting positions and longer ranges. The targets now sat at distances that required not just marksmanship but a deep understanding of how environmental factors affected bullet trajectory. Wind speed and direction, humidity, air pressure, temperature, all became variables in a complex equation that had to be solved in seconds. Sarah found herself in her element. The engineering mindset that had served her well in college now became her greatest asset. While other candidates relied on instinct and experience, she approached each shot like a problem to be solved. She would study the wind indicators, check her weather instruments, and make careful calculations before settling into position. Her performance began to stand out, but not always in ways that helped her cause. During one exercise, she achieved the best score of the day, hitting targets at 800 meters with remarkable consistency. Instead of praise, she received additional scrutiny. Her rifle was inspected more thoroughly than usual. Her ammunition was checked and rechecked. Questions were asked about her previous training that seemed designed to find some explanation other than skill for her performance. Instructor Davis, a veteran with multiple combat deployments, pulled her aside after the exercise. His expression was unreadable as he led her away from the other candidates. "Martinez, we need to talk," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made Sarah's stomach drop. "There are some concerns about your performance today." "Concerns, sir?" "My scores were within acceptable parameters." Sarah kept her voice steady, but internally she was bracing for whatever was coming. "Your scores were more than acceptable." "That's the problem." Davis stopped walking and turned to face her directly. "Nobody improves that dramatically without some kind of assistance. We need to make sure everything is above board." The implication hit Sarah like a physical blow. They were suggesting she had cheated somehow, that her success was artificial rather than earned. The unfairness of it burned in her throat, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I understand your concern, sir. I'm happy to cooperate with any investigation you feel is necessary." The words tasted bitter, but she knew that protesting too strongly would only make things worse. Davis nodded, his expression softening slightly. "It's nothing personal, Martinez. We just have to be thorough. These programs have standards to maintain." That evening, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, staring at her rifle. The weapon lay disassembled on her desk, each component clean and precisely arranged. She had gone through the cleaning process 3 times, needing the familiar ritual to calm her racing thoughts. The knock on her door came just after lights out. Thompson stood in the hallway, his face serious in the dim emergency lighting. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. Sarah stepped aside to let him in, closing the door behind him. Thompson looked around the sparse room, his gaze lingering on the disassembled rifle. "Word is you're under investigation," he said without preamble. "Something about irregular performance patterns. Word travels fast around here." Sarah's voice was flat, emotionless. "Look, I've been watching you shoot. We all have. You're not cheating. You're just thinking differently than the rest of us. Thompson moved closer to the desk where her rifle lay in pieces. Mind if I ask you something? Sarah gestured for him to continue. That grouping you shot today. The one that got everyone's attention. How did you know to adjust for the wind shift in the last valley? The question surprised Sarah. Most of the other candidates hadn't even noticed the subtle change in wind direction that had occurred halfway through the exercise. She had compensated for it almost instinctively, making the necessary adjustments to her aim based on calculations that had become second nature. I studied the wind patterns during the morning briefing. The weather report mentioned a pressure system moving in from the west. Combined with the terrain features, it was predictable that we'd see a wind shift around midday. She paused, realizing how clinical her explanation sounded. I just did the math. Thompson stared at her for a long moment. You did the math. While lying in the dirt with a rifle, under evaluation pressure, you did ballistics calculations in your head. Is that unusual? Sarah, most of us are lucky if we can remember to breathe consistently while shooting. You're running meteorological analyses in real time. Thompson shook his head. No wonder they think something's wrong. What you're doing shouldn't be possible. The conversation left Sarah more confused than reassured. Was her analytical approach really that unusual? She had always assumed that everyone approached shooting the same way, by understanding the science behind the bullet's flight and making appropriate adjustments. The next morning brought more scrutiny. Her equipment was inspected again, more thoroughly this time. Every component of her rifle was examined, measured, and documented. Her ammunition was taken for testing. Even her shooting glasses were checked for any modifications that might provide an unfair advantage. During the inspection, Sarah noticed something that hadn't been apparent before. The rifle she had been issued showed signs of previous use, small markings and, were patterns that indicated it had seen extensive service. Most notably, there were tiny scratches near the serial number that looked almost like initials or symbols. Instructor Williams oversaw the inspection personally, his attention focused on every detail of Sarah's equipment. When he examined the rifle's markings, his expression changed subtly. The casual professionalism was replaced by something more intense, more focused. Where did you get this rifle, Martinez? He asked, his voice carrying a new edge. It was issued to me from the armory, sir. Standard procedure during in-processing. Sarah watched his face, trying to read the source of his sudden interest. Williams turned the rifle over in his hands, studying the markings more carefully. The scratches near the serial number seemed to capture his attention completely. He traced them with one finger, his brow furrowed in concentration. I need to check something, he said finally, setting the rifle aside. Continue with the inspection. I'll be back. Williams disappeared for over an hour, leaving Sarah to endure the continued examination of her equipment. When he returned, he was accompanied by Sergeant Major Richards and another instructor Sarah didn't recognize, an older man with the bearing of someone who had seen significant combat. Martinez, Richards said, his voice carrying an authority that commanded immediate attention. We need to discuss your rifle assignment. The three instructors exchanged glances that spoke of shared knowledge Sarah wasn't privy to. The unknown instructor stepped forward, his weathered face serious but not unkind. I'm Master Sergeant Cole, he said by way of introduction. I've been asked to look at your equipment because of some irregularities that have come to light. Cole picked up Sarah's rifle, handling it with the reverence of someone who understood its true value. His examination was different from the others, less clinical, more personal. When he reached the markings near the serial number, his breath caught audibly. Son of a bitch, he whispered, then caught himself and looked up at Sarah. Sorry for the language. It's just, this rifle has quite a history. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of history, sir? Cole's eyes met hers directly. This rifle belonged to one of the best snipers this program ever produced. Someone who redefined what we thought was possible in terms of precision shooting. He paused, the weight of memory evident in his expression. Someone who was also drummed out of the program under circumstances that, in hindsight, were completely unjustified. The room fell silent. Sarah could feel the tension radiating from the three instructors, could sense that she had stumbled into something much larger than a simple equipment issue. "I don't understand," she said finally. Richard stepped forward, his expression grave. "Martinez, the rifle you've been using was custom modified by its previous owner. Those modifications are subtle, almost invisible, but they're there. The trigger mechanism, the barrel harmonics, even the scope mounting system, everything has been fine-tuned to a degree that would take years of experimentation to achieve." The implications began to dawn on Sarah. "You think I'd been using modified equipment? That's why my scores improved?" "That was our initial assumption," Williams said. "But Master Sergeant Cole has provided some additional context that changes things significantly." Cole nodded slowly. "The person who modified this rifle was investigated for the same reasons you are now. Exceptional performance that couldn't be explained by traditional training methods. The assumption was made that cheating was involved, that shortcuts had been taken." His voice carried the weight of old regrets. "It wasn't until years later that we learned the truth. There was no cheating. Just a level of analytical thinking that was so far beyond normal that we couldn't recognize it for what it was." Sarah's mind raced to process what she was hearing. Someone else had faced the same accusations, the same scrutiny. Someone who had been removed from the program unjustly. "What happened to them?" she asked. Cole's expression darkened. "Career destroyed. Reputation ruined. One of the most naturally gifted marksmen I've ever known was lost to the military because we couldn't accept that exceptional ability sometimes looks different than what we expect." The weight of the revelation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Sarah realized that she was standing at a crossroads that would determine not just her own future, but potentially correct an injustice from the past. "So what happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richards exchanged another look with his colleagues before answering. "Now we figure out whether history is going to repeat itself, or whether we're finally smart enough to learn from our mistakes." The investigation that followed Master Sergeant Cole's revelation took on an entirely different character. What had begun as a probe into potential cheating transformed into something more complex, an examination of how the military evaluated exceptional talent and whether institutional biases had prevented recognition of legitimate ability. Sarah found herself in the unusual position of being both subject and witness to this investigation. Her daily routine continued with classes and range time, but now every action was documented with scientific precision. Instructors who had previously shown skepticism now watched her with intense curiosity, as if trying to decode a puzzle that had been hiding in plain sight. Master Sergeant Cole took personal charge of documenting Sarah's shooting methodology. Unlike the previous inspectors who had focused on equipment and ammunition, Cole was interested in the mental processes behind her performance. He sat with her during preparation phases, asking detailed questions about her decision-making process. "Walk me through what you're thinking right now," Cole said as Sarah settled into position for a 600-meter shot. The target downrange was partially obscured by heat shimmer rising from the sun-baked ground. "Wind is coming from the northwest at approximately 8 miles per hour, gusting to 12, Sarah responded without taking her eye from the scope. "Humidity is higher than yesterday, which will affect bullet drop. Temperature has risen 3 degrees since the morning briefing, so I need to account for decreased air density." Cole made notes as she spoke, his expression thoughtful. "How do you factor all of that into your aim point?" "The wind will push the bullet approximately 4 inches to the right at this distance. The humidity and temperature changes combined will drop the bullet about 2 inches low compared to yesterday's conditions." Sarah made minute adjustments to her scope. "I'm also accounting for the slight upward angle of this firing position and the fact that this particular lot of ammunition runs about half a minute of angle high based on my previous shots. The shot broke cleanly, and the spotter confirmed a center hit." Cole reviewed his notes, shaking his head slightly. "Most snipers develop that kind of environmental awareness after years of field experience," he said. "You're calculating variables that some instructors don't even consider." The comment stuck with Sarah through the rest of the day. She had never thought of her approach as unusual, it seemed logical to consider all factors that might affect the bullet's path. But, as she observed her fellow candidates more carefully, she began to understand what Cole meant. Most relied heavily on instinct and basic adjustments, making corrections based on trial and error rather than systematic analysis. Thompson approached her during the evening cleaning period, his expression curious rather than accusatory.
"Cole's been asking questions about your background. Engineering school, right?"
"Yeah. Mechanical engineering with a focus on ballistics and materials science." Sarah continued cleaning her rifle, the familiar routine providing comfort amid the ongoing scrutiny.
"That explains a lot. You're treating every shot like an engineering problem." Thompson sat down across from her. "The rest of us are playing checkers while you're playing chess." The analogy was more accurate than Thompson realized.
Sarah's engineering education had taught her to approach complex problems systematically, breaking them down into manageable variables and optimizing solutions based on multiple factors. What seemed like intuitive shooting to outside observers was actually the application of scientific principles in real time. But understanding her methodology didn't resolve the larger questions surrounding the investigation. The rifle modifications discovered by Cole had opened a can of worms that reached far beyond Sarah's individual case. Inquiries were being made into equipment assignment procedures, quality control processes, and the circumstances surrounding the previous sniper's dismissal from the program.
Colonel Harrison, the overall program commander, arrived on base to personally oversee the investigation.
His reputation preceded him, a no-nonsense officer known for making difficult decisions based on facts rather than politics. When he called Sarah to his temporary office, the atmosphere was formal but not hostile.
"Sit down, Martinez."
Harrison gestured to a chair across from his desk, which was covered with files and reports. "I've been reviewing everything related to your case, and I need to ask you some direct questions."
"Yes, sir."
"First,
did you know about the modifications to your rifle when it was issued to you?"
"No, sir.
I was told it was standard equipment from the armory." Harrison made a note.
"Second, have you received any outside coaching or assistance during this program?"
"No, sir.
My only training prior to arrival was basic marksmanship with my grandfather and some recreational shooting in college."
Third, and this is important, have you ever heard the name Marcus Webb? The name meant nothing to Sarah.
"No, sir."
"Should I have?"
Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying her face carefully. "Marcus Webb was the previous owner of your rifle. He was dismissed from this program 8 years ago under circumstances very similar to what we're investigating now." The colonel opened one of the files on his desk and began reading from it.
"Exceptional performance that seemed to exceed normal training parameters. Accusations of equipment tampering and unauthorized assistance.
A subsequent investigation that found irregularities but no definitive proof of wrongdoing." Sarah listened with growing unease. The parallels to her own situation were unmistakable.
"Webb maintained his innocence throughout the investigation," Harrison continued.
"He claimed his performance was based on analytical techniques he had developed independently."
"Sound familiar?"
"Yes, sir.
The difference is that Webb's career was destroyed by the accusations.
He was removed from the program, transferred to a non-combat role, and eventually forced out of the military entirely." Harrison's voice carried a note of regret. "Recent information suggests that we may have made a significant error in judgment." The weight of that revelation settled over Sarah like a lead blanket. Someone else had faced the same suspicions, the same scrutiny, and had been destroyed by it. She was walking the same path that had led to Marcus Webb's downfall. "What kind of recent information?" she asked. Harrison pulled another file from the stack. "Webb went on to become a competitive shooter after leaving the military. He's won multiple national championships and set several records in precision rifle competition. His techniques have been studied and validated by some of the best shooters in the world."
The irony was bitter.
The same abilities that had led to Webb's dismissal from the military had later proven themselves in civilian competition. His analytical approach to shooting, once viewed with suspicion, was now recognized as revolutionary. More importantly, Harrison continued, Webb has been willing to share his techniques with researchers studying marksmanship training. What we've learned suggests that there are individuals with natural analytical abilities that allow them to process shooting variables in ways that far exceed normal training methods. Sarah felt a glimmer of hope mixed with apprehension.
Does that mean you believe my performance is legitimate?
It means we're taking a much more careful look at the evidence before making any decisions.
Harrison's tone was measured. But, I need you to understand something, Martinez.
Even if your abilities are natural, there are people who will never accept that.
The modifications to your rifle, regardless of who made them, create complications that won't easily disappear. The conversation left Sarah with more questions than answers.
She understood that her situation had become intertwined with efforts to potentially correct a historical injustice, but she also realized that the political implications might work against her regardless of the truth.
That evening, Master Sergeant Cole found Sarah on the range during personal practice time.
She was working through a series of positions and distances, trying to maintain her skills while the investigation continued.
Mind if I join you? Cole asked, carrying his own rifle and equipment.
Not at all, sir. Cole sat up on the firing line next to Sarah, going through his own pre-shooting routine with practiced efficiency. For several minutes, they shot in comfortable silence, each focused on their own targets and techniques.
I owe you an explanation, Cole said finally, setting down his rifle.
About Webb, and about why this investigation matters so much. Sarah lowered her own weapon and turned to listen. Webb was my student, Cole continued. 8 years ago, I was one of the instructors who recommended his dismissal from the program.
I believed the accusations.
I thought he had to be cheating somehow, because what he was doing seemed impossible. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. It wasn't until years later, when I saw him compete in civilian matches, that I realized what we had done.
Webb wasn't cheating.
He was thinking about shooting in ways that none of us had ever encountered.
He was applying scientific principles that made our traditional training methods look primitive.
Cole's voice carried the weight of professional regret. I destroyed the career of one of the most talented individuals I've ever encountered because I couldn't recognize excellence when it didn't fit my preconceptions.
Sarah understood the subtext. Cole was determined not to make the same mistake twice.
The modifications to your rifle, Cole continued, they're not just random improvements.
Webb documented every change he made, explaining the scientific reasoning behind each one.
He was trying to optimize the weapon system to match his analytical approach to shooting.
Why wasn't that recognized at the time? Because we were looking for evidence of cheating, not evidence of innovation. When you're convinced someone is breaking rules, you interpret everything through that lens.
Cole picked up his rifle again, checking the scope settings. Webb tried to explain his methods, but his explanations sounded like technical gibberish to instructors who had learned to shoot through instinct and repetition.
The parallel to Sarah's own experience was clear.
Her engineering background and systematic approach to problem solving were being viewed with the same suspicion that had destroyed Webb's career.
What can I do? Sarah asked. Keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Document everything. Be able to explain your methods clearly and scientifically. Cole's tone became more intense.
And understand that you're not just fighting for your own career. You're fighting to prove that Webb was right all along. The pressure of that responsibility was enormous. Sarah realized that her success or failure would have implications far beyond her personal goals. She had become the focal point for a larger discussion about how the military identified and nurtured exceptional talent. Over the following days, the investigation took on aspects of a scientific study. Sarah's shooting sessions were recorded with high-speed cameras. Her verbal explanations of technique were documented in detail. Weather conditions, ammunition performance, and equipment specifications were measured and analyzed with unprecedented precision. Colonel Harrison brought in outside experts, civilian shooting coaches, ballistics researchers, and sports psychologists who specialized in elite performance. These experts observed Sarah's methods with fresh eyes, unencumbered by military traditions and assumptions. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a sports scientist from the Olympic Training Center, spent an entire day analyzing Sarah's approach to environmental factors. Her conclusions were revealing. What Sarah is doing is essentially real-time data processing at a level I typically only see in computer-assisted systems, Dr. Walsh explained to the assembled instructors. She's not just considering individual variables like wind or temperature.
She's running complex calculations that account for interactions between multiple environmental factors.
Dr. Walsh pulled up charts and graphs on her laptop, showing the correlation between Sarah's verbal descriptions of conditions and the actual measured environmental data. Her accuracy in estimating wind speed and direction exceeds what we typically see from meteorological instruments.
She's somehow developed the ability to synthesize subtle environmental cues into precise numerical assessments.
The scientific validation of Sarah's abilities was both vindication and complication. It proved that her performance was legitimate, but it also highlighted just how unusual her capabilities were. The very excellence that should have been celebrated instead became a source of institutional discomfort. Sergeant Major Richards summarized the dilemma during a meeting with the investigation team. So we have a candidate who is performing at a level that exceeds normal parameters, using methods that are scientifically sound but operationally unprecedented. The question becomes whether we're equipped to train and utilize someone with these capabilities. The discussion revealed deeper issues within the military training system. Programs were designed around average performers, with methods optimized for bringing typical soldiers up to acceptable standards. Exceptional performers who operated outside normal parameters often fell through cracks in the system, either by being held back by conventional methods or by being dismissed as anomalies. Sarah found herself caught in the middle of these broader institutional questions. Her individual performance had become a case study in how the military could better identify and develop exceptional talent. But case studies, however valuable, didn't necessarily translate into immediate career advancement. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Webb himself, contacted through his civilian competitive shooting career, agreed to participate in the investigation. His arrival on base created a stir among instructors who remembered his dismissal 8 years earlier. Webb was now in his early 30s, carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had found success despite institutional rejection. His meeting with Sarah was arranged as part of the ongoing investigation, but it quickly became something more personal. "They tell me you've been shooting my rifle," Webb said with a slight smile as they met in the conference room. "I didn't know it was yours until recently. I'm sorry for the trouble it's caused." Webb laughed, a sound without bitterness despite everything he had endured.
"The rifle isn't the problem. The problem is that some people can't accept that there are different ways to excel."
Webb spent the next several hours explaining his approach to precision shooting, using technical language that resonated with Sarah's engineering background. His methods were indeed revolutionary, a systematic approach that treated every shot as an engineering problem with multiple variables and optimal solutions. "The modifications I made to that rifle were designed to complement analytical thinking," Webb explained. "Traditional rifles are optimized for average shooters using average methods. I needed a weapon system that could keep up with more precise calculations." More importantly, Webb provided historical context for the resistance Sarah was facing. 8 years ago, there was no framework for understanding analytical shooting methods. Instructors had been trained in traditional techniques, and anything outside that framework was viewed with suspicion.
"Has that changed?" Sarah asked. "Somewhat.
Competitive shooting has pushed the boundaries of what's considered possible. Military programs are starting to recognize that there might be better ways to approach precision marksmanship."
Webb's expression became more serious.
But institutional change is slow, and there are still people who prefer familiar mediocrity over unfamiliar excellence. Webb's testimony to the investigation committee was detailed and technical, explaining not just what he had done but why traditional evaluation methods had failed to recognize legitimate innovation. His civilian success provided credible evidence that his techniques were not only valid but superior to conventional approaches. The committee's final report, delivered to Colonel Harrison after 2 weeks of intensive investigation, contained findings that surprised no one who had been following the case closely. Sarah's performance was legitimate, based on advanced analytical techniques that represented a significant evolution in marksmanship methodology. The rifle modifications, while unauthorized, were scientifically sound and designed to complement rather than substitute for shooter skill.
But the report also contained recommendations that went far beyond Sarah's individual case.
It called for comprehensive review of training methods, equipment assignment procedures, and evaluation criteria for exceptional performers. It suggested establishing protocols for identifying and nurturing analytical shooters rather than forcing them into traditional training molds. Sarah waited for the official decision on her status in the program with a mixture of hope and anxiety. The investigation had vindicated her methods, but institutional politics and bureaucratic momentum could still work against her. She had learned that being right wasn't always enough, sometimes the system needed time to catch up with reality. The official decision came on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Sarah was completing her pre-range inspection when Sergeant Major Richards appeared at her station, his expression unreadable. The past 3 weeks of investigation had created an atmosphere of suspended animation, where normal training continued, but everyone understood that larger forces were at work behind the scenes. "Martinez, report to Colonel Harrison's office immediately," Richards said. His tone gave no hint of what awaited her. The walk across the base felt longer than usual. Sarah had been through this kind of summons before, the formal notification that would determine whether her military career continued or ended in disgrace. The investigation had provided scientific validation of her abilities, but institutional inertia was a powerful force that didn't always bend to evidence. Colonel Harrison was not alone when Sarah entered his office. Master Sergeant Cole sat in one of the chairs facing the desk, while a woman in civilian clothes occupied the other. Sarah had never seen the civilian before, but her bearing suggested military background despite her business attire. "Sit down, Martinez," Harrison said, gesturing to an empty chair that had been placed in the room for her arrival. "This is Dr. Patricia Morse from the Army Research Laboratory," Harrison continued by way of introduction. "She's been reviewing the investigation findings and has some questions for you." Dr. Morse leaned forward slightly, her manner professional but not unfriendly. "Martinez, I've been studying your shooting methodology and the scientific analysis provided by our experts. I need to understand something about your approach to environmental calculations." Sarah waited, unsure what specific aspect Dr. Morse wanted to explore. "The investigators documented your ability to estimate wind conditions with remarkable accuracy. Can you explain how you developed this capability?" "It started with studying fluid dynamics in college," Sarah replied. "Wind behaves according to predictable physical principles, but those principles become more complex when you factor in terrain features, temperature gradients, and atmospheric pressure variations." Dr. Morse made notes as Sarah spoke. "Most shooters use visual indicators like flags or vegetation movement to estimate wind. Your approach seems more comprehensive. Visual indicators only tell part of the story. A flag might show surface wind at one location, but that doesn't account for wind layers at different altitudes, or how terrain channeling affects air movement between the firing position and target." Sarah found herself settling into explanation mode, the same analytical framework she used when solving engineering problems. "I watch for multiple indicators simultaneously: vegetation movement at various points along the bullet's path, heat shimmer patterns that reveal air density variations, even the way dust or debris moves in response to air currents. Then, I apply fluid dynamics principles to extrapolate the complete wind profile." Dr. Morse exchanged glances with Colonel Harrison and Master Sergeant Cole. "That level of analysis is typically performed by meteorological computers, not individual shooters. The calculations aren't that complex once you understand the underlying principles. It's similar to solving differential equations, difficult to learn initially, but routine once you develop the methodology." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Dr. Morse probing deeper into Sarah's analytical processes. She asked about ballistics calculations, environmental compensation techniques, and the mental framework Sarah used to synthesize multiple variables into shooting solutions. Finally, Dr. Morse sat back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Colonel Harrison, based on what I've heard today and the documentation provided by your investigation, I believe we're dealing with something unprecedented in military marksmanship training." Harrison nodded slowly. "What are your recommendations?" "First, Martinez should immediately be reinstated to full training status with no adverse notations in her record. Her methods are not only legitimate but represent significant advances in precision shooting technique. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her, but Dr. Morse wasn't finished.
Second, we need to develop new training protocols that can identify and nurture analytical shooters like Martinez. The traditional one-size-fits-all approach is wasting exceptional talent.
Dr. Morse turned to address Sarah directly.
There's something else you should know.
The Army Research Laboratory has been developing advanced marksmanship programs that specifically seek individuals with analytical capabilities like yours.
We'd like you to consider participating in that program after you complete this course.
The offer was unexpected and intriguing, but Sarah's immediate focus remained on finishing the program she had started.
I appreciate the opportunity, ma'am.
Right now, I just want to complete sniper school and prove that analytical methods can work within existing military structures.
Colonel Harrison smiled for the first time during the meeting. I think we can arrange that. However, there are some conditions attached to your reinstatement.
Sarah braced herself for the inevitable complications. You'll be working with a new instructor. Master Sergeant Cole has volunteered to develop specialized training methods that complement your analytical approach.
This will be experimental, both for you and for the program.
Cole spoke for the first time since introductions had been made.
We're going to document everything.
Your methods, your results, your teaching techniques when working with other candidates. This becomes a case study for how the military can better utilize exceptional analytical talent.
The prospect was both exciting and daunting.
Sarah would be completing her training while simultaneously helping to develop new methodologies for future analytical shooters. Success would validate not just her individual abilities but an entirely new approach to military marksmanship training.
There's one more thing, Harrison added.
Marcus Webb has agreed to serve as a consultant during this experimental phase. His civilian experience with analytical shooting methods will provide valuable perspective on long-term development.
Sarah's reinstatement to the program was announced without fanfare.
Officially, the investigation had resolved equipment irregularities and confirmed that all training standards were being met appropriately. The broader implications of analytical shooting methods were not discussed publicly, allowing Sarah to return to normal training without becoming a spectacle.
But her fellow candidates noticed the changes immediately.
Master Sergeant Cole's specialized instruction sessions were conducted separately from regular training, often involving detailed discussions of ballistics theory and environmental analysis that went far beyond standard curriculum. Thompson was the first to comment on the new arrangement.
Looks like they decided you're not cheating after all.
Something like that, Sarah replied, not wanting to discuss the full complexity of her situation.
Cole's been asking some of us questions about our shooting techniques, comparing different approaches. Thompson's tone was curious rather than resentful.
I think you've gotten them thinking about whether there are better ways to teach marksmanship. The experimental training program that Cole developed for Sarah was unlike anything in the standard military curriculum. Instead of focusing solely on repetitive practice and memorized procedures, it emphasized understanding the scientific principles underlying accurate shooting. Sarah found herself explaining her analytical methods to other instructors, helping them understand how environmental factors interacted in complex ways.
Webb's involvement brought additional depth to the program.
His civilian competitive experience had allowed him to refine analytical techniques beyond what military constraints had previously permitted. During their training sessions, he shared insights about equipment optimization, environmental measurement techniques, and mental frameworks for processing multiple variables simultaneously. The key insight, Webb explained during one session, is that analytical shooting isn't about replacing instinct with calculation. It's about developing enhanced instincts based on scientific understanding. Sarah found this perspective particularly valuable as she worked with other candidates who showed potential for analytical approaches. Not everyone could process environmental variables the way she did, but many could learn to incorporate more systematic thinking into their shooting methodology. The most significant breakthrough came during a long-range exercise designed to test candidates' abilities under challenging conditions. The target was positioned at 1,000 meters across a valley with complex wind patterns created by terrain features.
Most candidates struggled with the environmental challenges, making multiple shots before achieving acceptable accuracy.
Sarah approached the exercise systematically, spending several minutes analyzing wind indicators throughout the valley, measuring temperature and humidity variations, and calculating the complex trajectory required for the shot. Her first shot achieved a direct hit, but, more importantly, her second and third shots landed in nearly identical positions, demonstrating consistency that exceeded even instructor expectations. The performance drew attention from visiting officials who were observing the exercise. Among them was General Patricia Williams, who commanded the Army's Special Operations Training Division. Her presence indicated that Sarah's case had attracted attention at the highest levels of military leadership. After the exercise concluded, General Williams requested a briefing on the experimental training program. Cole and Webb presented their methodology, while Sarah demonstrated some of the analytical techniques that had become second nature to her. This represents a fundamental shift in how we think about marksmanship training, General Williams observed after the demonstration.
We've been trying to make everyone shoot the same way, instead of optimizing training methods for individual capabilities. The general's visit resulted in expanded support for the experimental program.
Additional resources were allocated for equipment optimization, environmental measurement tools, and documentation of analytical shooting techniques. More importantly, plans were developed to incorporate similar methodologies into other advanced military training programs. Sarah's individual progress through the remaining weeks of sniper school exceeded all expectations. Her analytical approach had been validated and refined through the experimental program, resulting in shooting performance that consistently ranked at the top of her class. But, perhaps more significantly, her teaching abilities had helped several other candidates improve their own precision through better understanding of environmental factors. The culminating exercise of the sniper program was a complex scenario that combined long-range shooting with tactical movement and mission planning. Candidates were required to infiltrate a target area, establish concealed firing positions, and engage multiple targets at varying distances under challenging conditions. Sarah's systematic approach to mission planning proved as valuable as her shooting abilities. She analyzed terrain features, predicted environmental changes throughout the exercise period, and developed contingency plans based on various scenarios. Her preparation was so thorough that she completed the exercise in record time while achieving perfect scores on all shooting requirements. But, the real measure of success came from her role in helping other candidates. Several individuals who had struggled with long-range shooting showed dramatic improvement after working with Sarah on analytical techniques. The collaborative approach to training, where exceptional performers shared knowledge rather than competing in isolation, represented a significant departure from traditional military education methods. Colonel Harrison's final evaluation of the experimental program contained recommendations that would influence military training for years to come. The success of analytical shooting methods had demonstrated that exceptional individual capabilities could be systematized and taught to others. More importantly, it showed that institutional flexibility in accommodating different learning and performance styles could yield superior results. Webb's participation in the program had provided a powerful example of how civilian expertise could enhance military training. His analytical techniques, refined through years of competitive shooting, offered insights that traditional military instructors might never have developed independently. The collaboration between military and civilian experts became a model for future training innovations. Dr. Morse's research into Sarah's capabilities had revealed broader implications for military personnel selection and development. The ability to identify individuals with exceptional analytical potential early in their careers could allow the military to optimize training resources and maximize individual development. Instead of forcing everyone into standardized programs, different tracks could be developed for different types of learners. As the sniper program neared its conclusion, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her situation had changed. What had begun as an investigation into potential cheating had evolved into validation of revolutionary training methods. Her individual success had become part of a larger transformation in how the military approached excellence and innovation. The final week of training brought visiting dignitaries from other military branches who wanted to observe the analytical shooting methods firsthand. Sarah found herself demonstrating techniques for Navy SEALs, Air Force Special Operations personnel, and Marines who specialized in precision shooting. The interest from elite units across the military spectrum indicated that her methods had applications far beyond the original sniper program. But, perhaps the most meaningful validation came from her fellow candidates. Thompson, who had been among the first to recognize her legitimate abilities, achieved his best scores of the entire program while working with analytical techniques Sarah had taught him. Other candidates similarly improved their performance through better understanding of environmental factors and systematic approaches to shooting preparation. The graduation ceremony for the sniper program was attended by more senior officers than usual, reflecting the attention Sarah's case had generated throughout the military hierarchy. When her name was called as the top graduate of the class, the applause carried special significance, recognition not just of individual achievement but of innovative methods that promised to enhance military capabilities. 6 months after graduating at the top of her sniper class, Sarah found herself in Afghanistan, where theoretical knowledge met the harsh reality of combat operations. The analytical techniques that had seemed revolutionary in training environments now faced the ultimate test: life and death situations where mathematical precision could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Her deployment with a special operations team had been specifically arranged to evaluate analytical shooting methods in combat conditions. The Army Research Laboratory, working with Dr. Morse, wanted documented evidence of how advanced marksmanship techniques performed under operational stress. Sarah carried the weight of proving that her methods weren't just training curiosities but genuine tactical advantages. The forward operating base in Helmand Province provided a stark contrast to the controlled environment of sniper school. Dust, heat, and the constant threat of enemy contact created variables that no amount of classroom preparation could fully simulate.
Sarah's first week consisted mainly of acclimatization and equipment verification, ensuring that her specialized gear functioned properly in desert conditions.
Her team leader, Captain Rodriguez, was a veteran of multiple deployments who approached Sarah's presence with professional curiosity tempered by operational pragmatism. He had been briefed on the experimental nature of her assignment but made it clear that mission requirements would take precedence over research objectives. "I don't care if you can calculate wind speed to 3 decimal places," Rodriguez told her during their initial meeting. "What matters is whether you can deliver accurate fire when people's lives depend on it."
Sarah understood the skepticism.
Combat veterans had seen innovations come and go, and they measured effectiveness in terms of lives saved rather than training scores. She would need to prove herself through performance, not explanations. The first operational test came during a village reconnaissance mission where Sarah's team was tasked with providing overwatch for a patrol moving through potentially hostile territory. The shooting position was established on a ridgeline 800 meters from the patrol route, with clear fields of fire but challenging environmental conditions. Strong winds gusted through the valley below, creating turbulent air currents that shifted direction unpredictably. Heat shimmer from sun-baked rocks distorted visibility, while dust particles in the atmosphere affected both optical clarity and ballistic performance. Traditional shooting methods would have required multiple ranging shots to establish accurate firing solutions. Sarah spent 15 minutes analyzing the environment before the patrol entered the area. She identified 3 distinct wind layers between her position and the valley floor, measured temperature gradients that would affect bullet trajectory, and calculated compensation factors for the dusty atmosphere. Her preparation was methodical and thorough, drawing curious glances from other team members who were accustomed to more intuitive approaches. When enemy fighters appeared unexpectedly near the patrol, Sarah's response demonstrated the value of analytical preparation. Her first shot at 850 meters neutralized a sniper who had been targeting the patrol leader. The shot required compensation for complex wind patterns and atmospheric conditions, but her calculations had been so precise that no ranging shots were necessary. The immediate tactical success was followed by detailed analysis of Sarah's performance. Her shot placement had been within 2 inches of the intended point of impact, despite environmental factors that would have challenged even experienced snipers. The accuracy was remarkable, but equally impressive was the speed with which she had transitioned from analysis to action. Captain Rodriguez's assessment was succinct: "Whatever you did in training, keep doing it." That shot saved lives today. But Sarah knew that single incidents, however successful, didn't constitute comprehensive validation. Combat operations presented infinite variations in conditions, targets, and tactical requirements.
Her analytical methods would need to prove themselves across the full spectrum of operational scenarios. The next several weeks provided ample opportunity for that proof. Each mission brought different challenges that tested various aspects of analytical shooting.
Urban operations required calculations for ricochets and penetration through building materials.
Mountain operations involved extreme ranges and altitude effects on ballistics.
Night missions added the complexity of thermal imaging and infrared considerations.
Throughout each operation, Sarah documented her methods and results with scientific precision.
Dr. Morse had provided specialized equipment for measuring environmental conditions and recording shot data. The information would eventually contribute to training programs, but, in the immediate term, it helped Sarah refine her techniques for combat applications. The most significant test came during a high-value target operation where Sarah's team was tasked with eliminating enemy leadership in a heavily defended compound. Intelligence indicated that the targets would appear briefly on a rooftop approximately 1,200 meters from the nearest feasible shooting position.
The tactical constraints were severe.
The shooting window would last less than 30 seconds, with no opportunity for ranging shots or corrections. Wind conditions in the area were notoriously unpredictable, influenced by thermals rising from the desert floor and gusty patterns created by the compound's architecture. A single shot would need to neutralize the target immediately, as any delay would compromise the entire operation.
Sarah's preparation for this mission represented the culmination of everything she had learned about analytical shooting.
She spent 2 days studying satellite imagery, weather patterns, and ballistic calculations for the expected engagement scenario. Her analysis identified optimal firing positions based on wind patterns, calculated bullet drop for the extreme range, and developed contingency plans for various environmental conditions. The night before the operation, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at the forward operating base. Marcus Webb, now working as a civilian contractor specializing in advanced marksmanship training, had been flown in to provide technical support for the high-value target mission. "Heard you might be taking a shot that would make headlines," Webb said as they met in the Tactical Operations Center. "Thought you could use some perspective from someone who's been where you are." Webb's presence provided more than technical expertise, it was a reminder of the broader significance of Sarah's work. His career had been destroyed by institutional failure to recognize analytical shooting methods. Her success in combat operations would validate not just her individual abilities but the entire approach that had cost Webb his military career. "The shot you're planning is at the edge of what most snipers would consider possible," Webb continued. "Traditional methods would rely heavily on luck at that range and under those conditions. Your analytical approach gives you a genuine tactical advantage." They spent the evening reviewing Sarah's calculations and discussing refinements to her methodology. Webb's civilian competitive experience had exposed him to techniques and equipment that weren't available in military training, providing insights that enhanced Sarah's already sophisticated approach. The mission launched in the pre-dawn darkness, with Sarah's team moving to their designated position while other elements surrounded the target compound. Radio communications were kept to minimum to avoid detection, but Sarah could track the operation's progress through coded updates from the command post. Establishing the shooting position required careful consideration of concealment, stability, and escape routes. Sarah selected a location that provided the necessary fields of fire while minimizing exposure to enemy observation. Her rifle, still carrying Webb's modifications from sniper school, was configured specifically for the extreme range engagement. As dawn broke over the compound, Sarah began her final environmental analysis. Wind patterns were more complex than her pre-mission calculations had predicted, with thermal currents creating shifting air movements that changed the ballistic equation significantly. Temperature and humidity readings differed from forecast values, requiring real-time adjustments to her firing solution. The analytical framework that had seemed academic in training environments now became a matter of operational necessity. Sarah's calculations had to account for multiple variables simultaneously while maintaining the mental clarity required for precise shooting under extreme stress. The mathematics that had fascinated her in engineering school now carried the weight of mission success and team safety. Contact reports indicated that the targets were moving within the compound, but their appearance on the rooftop remained unpredictable. Sarah would need to be prepared to engage immediately when the opportunity presented itself, with no time for final adjustments or confirmation shots.
The moment came shortly after 0700 hours.
Intelligence sources confirmed that the primary target had appeared on the rooftop and was moving toward a vehicle parked nearby.
Sarah's window of opportunity would last approximately 20 seconds before the target reached cover.
Through her scope, Sarah could see the figure on the distant rooftop, wavering slightly in the heat shimmer that rose from the compound. The range was confirmed at 1,247 meters, pushing her rifle and ammunition to their maximum effective capabilities. Wind indicators throughout the valley showed the complex patterns she had analyzed, but actual conditions would determine the bullet's flight path.
Sarah's final calculations incorporated every variable she could measure or estimate.
Wind layers at different altitudes, temperature gradients along the bullet's path, atmospheric pressure, humidity effects, and even the slight upward angle of the shot. The mental computation took less than 5 seconds, but it represented the synthesis of months of training and weeks of preparation. The shot broke cleanly, with minimal muzzle flash and sound signature. Through the scope, Sarah tracked the bullet's flight path, watching for impact indicators at the distant target. The flight time at that range was nearly 2 seconds, an eternity in tactical terms. The target dropped immediately upon impact, confirming a successful hit. Radio communications crackled with confirmation from observation posts and intelligence sources. The primary target had been neutralized with a single shot, allowing the operation to proceed as planned. But Sarah's personal sense of achievement was tempered by the weight of what she had accomplished. The analytical methods that had been questioned and investigated were now validated in the most serious environment possible. Her success represented not just individual capability but proof that innovative approaches to military training could yield superior operational results. Captain Rodriguez's after-action assessment was unequivocal: that shot was beyond anything I've seen in 15 years of combat operations. Whatever training methods produced that capability need to be standard throughout special operations. The mission's success generated immediate interest from senior military leadership. Sarah found herself briefing generals and special operations commanders about analytical shooting methods and their combat applications. The documentation collected during her deployment became the foundation for new training programs and equipment development initiatives. Dr. Morse's analysis of Sarah's combat performance revealed implications that extended far beyond marksmanship training. The ability to process complex variables under extreme stress represented cognitive capabilities that had applications in multiple military specialties. The analytical framework that enabled superior shooting could potentially enhance performance in fields ranging from artillery to aviation. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the vindication it provided for Marcus Webb. 8 years after his dismissal from sniper school, his innovative techniques were being recognized as revolutionary advances in military capability. The Army formally apologized for the circumstances of his dismissal and offered him a position developing training programs based on analytical shooting methods. Webb's response was characteristic of his pragmatic approach to the situation: the important thing isn't correcting past mistakes. It's ensuring that future innovations aren't dismissed because they don't fit existing assumptions. Sarah's deployment concluded with her assignment to the Army Research Laboratory's Advanced Marksmanship Program. Her combat experience would be used to develop training curricula that combined analytical methods with operational requirements. The goal was to identify and train other soldiers who possessed the cognitive abilities necessary for analytical shooting. The selection process for analytical marksmen became a model for identifying exceptional talent in other military specialties. Instead of assuming that all soldiers should be trained identically, new programs were developed that matched training methods to individual capabilities and learning styles. Sarah's success had demonstrated that institutional flexibility could yield dramatic improvements in military effectiveness. Years later, as Sarah advanced through the ranks and eventually commanded her own special operations unit, she often reflected on the rifle markings that had changed her life. Webb's initials, scratched into the metal during his own time in sniper school, had become a symbol of how innovation could survive institutional resistance. The rifle itself was eventually retired to the Army's museum collection, displayed as an example of how individual creativity and analytical thinking could revolutionize military capabilities. But its true legacy lived on in the training programs and operational methods that had grown from the controversy surrounding its mysterious markings. Sarah's story became required reading in military leadership courses, not because of her individual achievements but because of what her experience revealed about organizational learning and adaptation. The institution that had nearly destroyed her career for being too different eventually celebrated those same differences as sources of competitive advantage. The lesson resonated beyond military circles. Educational institutions, corporate training programs, and research organizations began examining their own assumptions about talent development and performance evaluation. Sarah's experience demonstrated that exceptional ability often manifested in ways that challenged conventional wisdom, requiring institutional courage to recognize and nurture. Marcus Webb, meanwhile, had built a successful second career developing training programs for military and civilian precision shooting. His techniques, once viewed with suspicion, were now taught to elite units throughout the world. The civilian competitive shooting community had embraced analytical methods, pushing the boundaries of human marksmanship capabilities to new levels. The compound in Afghanistan where Sarah had taken her career-defining shot eventually became a footnote in military history. But, for those who understood the broader significance of that moment, it represented something more profound, proof that innovation and excellence could triumph over institutional inertia, even when the stakes were measured in human lives. Sarah's rifle, with its carefully concealed modifications and mysterious markings, had told a story that transcended individual achievement. It spoke to the importance of questioning assumptions, recognizing talent in unexpected forms, and maintaining institutional flexibility in the face of changing requirements. In the end, those scratched initials had revealed not just the identity of a previous owner, but the path toward a revolution in military training and capability development that would influence operations for generations to come.